My name's Mike, and for most of my life, I thought I had it all figured out. I'd been married to Sarah for over 30 years. We met in college, me, the quiet guy who spent more time in the library than the football field, and her, the life of the party who somehow found her way into my world. We weren't perfect, but I always believed we had something real. Something worth fighting for. Together, we built a family, 3 kids, Alex, Rachel, and Matt, who were my entire world. For years, life was a blur of soccer games, school recitals, family vacations, and quiet nights on the couch. Sure, we had our ups and downs, but I thought that was normal. Relationships take work, right? It wasn't until Matt, my youngest, got sick that things started to fall apart. He's 28 now, and we'd always joked about how he got his stubborn streak from me. But a few months ago, he ended up in the hospital with kidney problems, and the doctors said he'd need a transplant. Of course, I immediately volunteered. Without hesitation. That's when things started to unravel. At first, it seemed routine, just some blood tests to see if I'd be a match. I wasn't worried. I mean, I was his dad. We shared DNA. That's just how it worked. Or so I thought. The day the doctor called me back into his office, I noticed the tone in his voice. It wasn't the usual clinical detachment. It was hesitant, like he was bracing himself. He started with some medical jargon I barely understood, then finally dropped the bomb. "Mr. Harris, I'm afraid the tests show you're not a biological match for Matt." I remember staring at him, thinking he must have made a mistake. There was no way. "What do you mean?" "He's my son," I said, my voice shaking. He gave me that practiced sympathetic look and handed me the papers. Cold, hard facts in black and white. "Genetically, you're not his father." In that moment, my world stopped. It was like someone had yanked the floor out from under me, and I was free falling into some dark abyss. I didn't want to believe it. Hell, I couldn't believe it. But the evidence was right there in my hands. And this was just the beginning of the storm. I left the doctor's office in a daze, clutching those test results like they were a cruel joke someone had played on me. The drive home was a blur, I don't even remember the turns I took. My mind was racing with questions I didn't want to ask but couldn't ignore. If Matt wasn't biologically mine, then what about Rachel? What about Alex? When I got home, Sarah was in the kitchen, humming to herself as she prepared dinner, completely unaware that my world had just imploded. For a moment, I stood in the doorway, watching her. How could she look so normal, so calm, when my entire reality felt like it was fracturing? I decided not to say anything. Not yet. I told myself I needed to process it first. But now, looking back, maybe I was just too scared of what I'd find if I pulled at that thread. A few days later, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I told Sarah what the doctor had said about Matt. Her reaction was, off. She froze, mid-chop, her knife hovering above the cutting board. She didn't look shocked, just, still. Too still. "Maybe there was a mistake," she said finally, her voice soft, almost rehearsed. But it didn't sit right with me. That look in her eyes, it wasn't confusion. It was fear. That night, I started noticing things I'd ignored for years. The way Sarah always avoided certain topics when we talked about the past. The way she'd deflect whenever someone joked about how Rachel didn't look much like me. At the time, I thought they were just coincidences. Now, I wasn't so sure. The final straw came when I decided to have both Rachel and Alex tested too. I didn't tell Sarah. I couldn't. Something in my gut told me I wouldn't like the answers, but I had to know. The results came back a week later, and they confirmed what I feared: Rachel wasn't biologically mine either. Only Alex, my oldest, shared my DNA. I stared at those papers, my hands trembling. The weight of it all hit me like a freight train. Decades of memories, the late-night feedings, the scraped knees I patched up, the countless bedtime stories, flashed before my eyes. None of it felt real anymore. But the worst part? The part that made my stomach churn and my heart ache. I knew this wasn't some random fluke. Sarah had known. She'd known for years. And she'd kept it from me. It was time for answers. That night, I sat at the dining room table, the DNA test results spread out in front of me like evidence in a trial. My hands were still shaking, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. I didn't want to do this, but I had no choice. Sarah walked in, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She stopped when she saw me sitting there. Her eyes flicked to the papers, and her face paled. She didn't even try to act confused. She knew exactly what those documents were. "Sit down," I said, my voice flat. "Mike, Sit. Down." She hesitated but finally lowered herself into the chair across from me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us felt like a canyon, wide and impossible to bridge. "I got the tests back," I started, my voice cold and steady, though every nerve in my body was screaming. "Matt isn't mine. And neither is Rachel. Only Alex." Her lips parted like she wanted to say something, but no words came out. Instead, tears welled up in her eyes. "How long, Sarah?" I asked. "How long have you been lying to me?" She opened her mouth, closed it again, and then finally whispered, "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." "Like what?" I snapped, slamming my hand on the table. "You weren't supposed to get caught. You weren't supposed to destroy our family. What the hell does that even mean?" She flinched at my tone but finally started talking. "It was Harvey," she said, her voice breaking. "It was Harvey all along. Harvey. Our best friend. The guy who used to come over for barbecues and watch football games with me. The man I trusted." My stomach turned as the realization hit me like a punch to the gut. "Harvey." I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "Are you telling me Harvey is their father?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face now. "It wasn't planned, Mike. I swear to you. Harvey and we were together before I met you. But then he left me for someone else, and I was devastated. When we got married, I thought I was over him, but he came back." Her words were like knives, each one cutting deeper. She confessed that she and Harvey had been involved for years after we got married, sneaking around behind my back. Brad and Rachel weren't accidents. They were his children. "Why?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why didn't you just leave me? Why lie to me for over 30 years? "Because I loved you," she said, reaching across the table for my hand. I pulled away. And I was scared. I didn't want to lose everything we had. "Love?" I spat, standing up so fast the chair nearly toppled over. "You call this love? Lying to me, betraying me, building a family on a foundation of lies? That's not love, Sarah. That's selfishness." She sobbed harder, but I felt no sympathy. Not then. I was too angry, too hurt. "Harvey's been dead for 25 years, I said, my voice cold and distant. "How long were you planning to carry this secret? Until I died? Until you did? Or were you just hoping I'd never find out?" She didn't answer, just buried her face in her hands. I couldn't look at her anymore. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I had built a life with, felt like a stranger. I grabbed the test results and left the room, slamming the door behind me. I sat in the car for hours that night, staring out into the dark. My mind raced with memories, our wedding day, the births of our children, the little moments that had once seemed so perfect. Now, they all felt tainted. By the time I finally came back inside, Sarah had gone to bed. But I knew sleep wouldn't come for me that night. All I could think about was what I was supposed to do next. Could I forgive her? Could I even stay with her after this? The betrayal was too fresh, the wounds too raw. All I knew for certain was that nothing in my life would ever be the same again. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. I couldn't even look at Sarah without a tidal wave of emotions crashing over me, anger, sadness, confusion. I'd walk into a room, see her sitting there, and feel like the air had been sucked out. I couldn't breathe around her. She tried to apologize, of course. Every chance she got, she would tell me how sorry she was, how much she regretted everything, how she loved me. But her words felt hollow, like a bad script that didn't match the reality I was living. I couldn't believe anything she said anymore. The kids noticed something was wrong almost immediately. Alex, my oldest, pulled me aside one evening after dinner. "Dad, what's going on?" he asked, concern etched into his face. "You and Mom have been so tense lately. Did something happen?" I wanted to tell him. God, I wanted to unload the whole truth right there. But how could I? How could I tell him that the mother he adored had lied to us all? That the family we thought we had was built on deceit? I couldn't do it. Not yet. Things are just complicated right now, Alex, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Your mom and I are working through some stuff. He didn't look convinced, but he nodded and didn't push further. Meanwhile, Sarah kept trying to make amends in her own way. She started leaving little notes around the house, on my nightstand, in the kitchen, even in my car. "I'm so sorry, Mike. I love you. Please, let's talk." I ignored them. Every note felt like a slap in the face, a reminder of the lies she'd told me for decades. One night, a week after the confrontation, she cornered me in the living room. I was sitting on the couch, pretending to watch TV, when she sat down beside me. "Mike, we need to talk," she said, her voice soft but firm. I didn't look at her. "I don't think there's anything left to say." "Please," she begged, placing a hand on my arm. I flinched but didn't pull away. "I know I've hurt you. I know I've broken your trust. But you have to understand, I never stopped loving you. I never stopped loving our family." "Our family?" I said, finally turning to face her. "You mean the family you lied to me about? The family you built on someone else's secrets?" Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I almost felt bad for her. Almost. But then I remembered the years of deception, the way she'd let me believe a lie for so long. "I didn't tell you because I was scared," she said. "Harvey, he didn't want anything to do with me after he got married. And you," her voice broke. "You were everything I needed. You were stable, kind, and loving. I didn't want to lose you. And when Harvey died, I thought it didn't matter anymore. That we could just move on and be happy." I shook my head, laughing bitterly. "Happy? You thought I'd be happy living a lie? You stole my right to know the truth, Sarah. You stole my right to make my own choices." Tears streamed down her face, but I didn't care. My own pain was too overwhelming to feel any sympathy for hers. "I don't know how we come back from this," I said finally, my voice breaking. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you." She reached for my hand again, but I pulled away and stood up. "I need space," I said, heading toward the stairs. "Don't follow me." I spent the night in the guest room, staring at the ceiling and wondering how everything had gone so wrong. I didn't want to end my marriage, but how could I stay with someone who had betrayed me so deeply? The weight of it all felt unbearable, and for the first time in my life, I didn't know if I had the strength to carry it. The days turned into weeks, and the house became a Cold War zone. Sarah and I barely spoke unless it was absolutely necessary. The tension was unbearable, thick enough to choke on. I started staying out late after work, driving aimlessly or sitting in parking lots, just to avoid going home. One night, Alex called me while I was sitting in my car outside a coffee shop. "Dad," he said, his voice cautious. "Mom's been crying a lot. She won't tell us what's going on, but Rachel and Matt are starting to notice." "What's happening between you two?" I hesitated, staring at the steering wheel. "Alex, it's complicated. Just trust me, okay? I'll explain when the time is right." He sighed on the other end of the line. "I don't know what's happening, but whatever it is, it's tearing Mom apart. Please, don't give up on her. On us." His words gutted me. I wanted to tell him the truth, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Not yet. The idea of shattering his world, Rachel's world, Matt's world, it felt like too much to bear. When I finally walked through the door that night, Sarah was waiting for me in the living room. She looked exhausted, her eyes red and puffy. It was clear she'd been crying again. "Mike," she said softly, standing as I entered. "We can't keep living like this. We need to figure out what we're going to do." I dropped my keys on the counter and leaned against the wall, crossing my arms. "What do you want me to say, Sarah? You want me to tell you everything's fine? That I can just forget the fact you lied to me for decades?" "No," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I can't fix what I've done. But I can't lose you, Mike. I can't lose our family. Please, let's go to counseling. Let's try to work through this." I scoffed, shaking my head. "Counseling? You think a few therapy sessions are going to erase 30 years of lies? You took away my right to the truth, Sarah. You robbed me of choices I didn't even know I had." She took a step closer, her hands trembling. "I know I hurt you. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But I'm begging you, Mike. Please don't let this destroy us." Her words hit me harder than I expected. As much as I wanted to stay angry, there was a part of me that still cared about her. 30 years of marriage doesn't just disappear overnight. But the betrayal was too deep, the wounds too raw. "I don't know if I can do this," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. She reached out, but I stepped back, creating a physical distance that mirrored the emotional chasm between us. "I need time," I said. "Time to think. Time to figure out what I want." Her face crumpled, and she nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Take all the time you need. Just, don't shut me out completely. Please." I didn't respond. I turned and walked upstairs, shutting the door to the guest room behind me. That night, lying on the stiff mattress, I stared at the ceiling and thought about what Alex had said. About how this was tearing Sarah apart. About the kids and the life we'd built together. Was it worth trying to salvage? For the first time since discovering the truth, I realized that whatever decision I made wouldn't just affect me, it would ripple through everyone I loved. And that made the choice so much harder. The next morning, I woke up feeling no closer to an answer. My mind was a storm of conflicting emotions, anger, sadness, betrayal, and, surprisingly, a small flicker of something else, doubt. Could I really walk away from 30 years of marriage? Could I destroy the only life my kids had ever known? As I got ready for work, I caught a glimpse of myself in the bathroom mirror. The man staring back at me looked older, wearier. I barely recognized him. That's when it hit me, I wasn't just fighting to figure out if I could forgive Sarah, I was trying to figure out who I was without the life we'd built together. That day at work was a blur. I spent most of it staring at my computer screen, pretending to be productive. My thoughts kept drifting back to our family, to the life I thought was real and the lies that had unraveled it. By the time I got home, I'd made a decision. Sarah was in the kitchen when I walked in. She looked up, her face filled with cautious hope and fear. "Mike," she started, but I held up a hand to stop her. "Let's talk," I said, gesturing toward the living room. We sat across from each other on the couch, the tension between us almost unbearable. I took a deep breath and began. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," I said, my voice steady but tired. "About us, the kids, and what this all means. And I've come to a decision." Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. "Okay," she whispered. "I can't forgive you for what you've done," I said, my words cutting like a knife. "At least, not yet. The lies, the betrayal, it's too much. I don't know if I'll ever be able to fully trust you again." Her face crumpled, but I pushed on. "That said, I'm not ready to throw away everything we've built. Not yet. I owe it to myself, to the kids, to try and figure out if this marriage is salvageable." "Does that mean," she began, her voice trembling. "It means we're not divorcing. At least, not for now," I said. "But things are going to change, Sarah. I can't just go back to how things were before. We're going to need help, real help. Counseling, boundaries, time. If we're going to have any chance of moving forward, we need to rebuild everything from the ground up." She nodded quickly, tears streaming down her face. "I'll do whatever it takes, Mike. I swear to you, I'll do anything to make this right." "I don't know if you can make it right," I admitted. "But I need to try, for the kids, if nothing else." For the first time in weeks, I saw a flicker of relief in her eyes, though it was overshadowed by the weight of what lay ahead. Over the next few days, I started laying the groundwork for what I hoped could be the start of something new. I reached out to a marriage counselor and scheduled our first session. I also began thinking about how to approach the kids with the truth, or at least some version of it. Deep down, I wasn't sure if this was the right choice. But as I sat at the dinner table that night, watching Alex and Matt argue over who had the worst taste in movies while Rachel laughed, I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't ready to give up on my family. Not yet. If there was even the smallest chance that we could come out of this stronger, I owed it to myself, and to them, to try. Even if it hurt like hell. The next hurdle was telling the kids. I'd been avoiding it for weeks, dreading the moment their world would be turned upside down. But if Sarah and I had any hope of moving forward, I knew the truth couldn't stay buried forever. We decided to gather everyone for dinner. It wasn't unusual for us to have family meals, so no one suspected anything out of the ordinary. Alex, Rachel, and Matt showed up with smiles on their faces, joking and laughing as they always did. It broke my heart to know that by the end of the night, those smiles might be gone. Dinner was a quiet affair, at least for Sarah and me. The kids filled the silence with chatter, oblivious to the tension in the air. When the meal was over, I cleared my throat and said, "There's something your mom and I need to talk to you about." Their faces shifted immediately, concern from Alex, curiosity from Rachel, and confusion from Matt. "What's going on?" Alex asked, his protective instincts kicking in. Sarah glanced at me, her eyes pleading for support. I took a deep breath, knowing this moment would change everything. "There's no easy way to say this," I began, my voice heavy with emotion. "But you deserve the truth. A few weeks ago, we found out that I'm not Matt's biological father." The room fell silent. It was as if all the air had been sucked out. Rachel and Matt stared at me in shock, while Alex's brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" Matt asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It means," I said, my voice cracking, "that your mom had an affair. Years ago." Rachel's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide. Matt looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. "Wait," Alex said, leaning forward. "You're saying Matt isn't yours? How is that possible?" I hesitated, but Sarah stepped in. "It wasn't just Matt," she said, her voice trembling. "Rachel too." Rachel's head snapped toward Sarah, her eyes filling with tears. "What?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "What are you talking about?" Sarah's tears started to flow as she tried to explain. Your biological father was Harvey. He and I were involved before your dad and I got married. And after. Harvey. Alex repeated, his tone filled with disbelief. Uncle Harvey? Dad's best friend? Rachel pushed her chair back abruptly, standing up. This can't be real. You're telling me my whole life has been a lie. Rachel, please, Sarah begged, reaching out to her. No, Rachel snapped, tears streaming down her face. Don't touch me. Matt, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke. So what am I to you? He asked, looking at me. If I'm not your son, then what am I? The pain in his voice nearly broke me. You're my son, I said firmly. No matter what. That hasn't changed, and it never will. He shook his head, his expression a mix of anger and hurt. It feels like everything's changed. Alex sat back in his chair, his arms crossed, staring at Sarah. You lied to us. To all of us. How could you do this? Sarah sobbed, but none of us moved to comfort her. For once, her tears weren't enough to soften the blow. I never wanted this to come out, she said. I thought I was protecting all of you. Protecting us? Rachel spat, her voice rising. You were protecting yourself, Mom. Don't act like this was for us. The room devolved into chaos. Rachel stormed out, slamming the front door behind her. Matt followed a few minutes later, saying nothing as he left. Alex stayed, but the look in his eyes told me he wasn't ready to forgive either of us. When the house was finally quiet, I sat on the couch, my head in my hands. Sarah sat beside me, but neither of us spoke. The weight of what we'd done, or rather, what she'd done, hung heavy in the air. That night, as I lay in the guest room once again, I realized just how far the fallout of this betrayal had reached. It wasn't just my marriage that was broken, it was my entire family. And I didn't know if we'd ever be able to put the pieces back together. The house felt like a ghost town in the days that followed. Rachel hadn't been home since the dinner, and Matt only came by to grab a few things before disappearing again. Alex stuck around, but our conversations were brief and stilted. I knew he was staying to support me, but there was a distance between us that hadn't been there before. I spent most of my time replaying that dinner in my head, going over every word, every reaction. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't figure out how to fix things. Sarah kept to herself, giving me the space I'd asked for, but even when we crossed paths, it was like we were strangers. A week later, Rachel finally called. Her voice was cold, distant. I want to talk, she said. But not at the house. Can we meet somewhere? Of course, I said, relieved she was even willing to speak to me. Where do you want to go? She chose a small coffee shop downtown, one she used to love in high school. I got there early, nervously nursing a cup of black coffee as I waited. When she walked in, I barely recognized her. She looked tired, her usual bright demeanor replaced with something darker, heavier. She sat down across from me, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. I just need to know one thing, she said without preamble. Did you know? Her question hit me like a ton of bricks. No, I said immediately. I had no idea. If I had, I trailed off, shaking my head. If I'd known, things would have been different. Her eyes searched mine, looking for any hint of deception. Finally, she nodded, her shoulders relaxing just a fraction. I believe you. Rachel, I'm so sorry, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I know this doesn't make any of it better, but you're still my daughter. That hasn't changed, and it never will. She looked down at her hands, picking at the edge of a napkin. I don't know who I am anymore, she admitted. Everything I thought I knew about myself feels like a lie. You're not a lie, I said firmly. You're still the same person you've always been. This doesn't change that. She nodded slowly, but I could tell my words only went so far. I need time, she said. I'm not ready to forgive Mom. I don't even know if I can. That's okay, I said. Take all the time you need. Just know that I'm here, no matter what. She stood to leave, hesitating for a moment before leaning down to hug me. It was brief, but it was enough to give me a glimmer of hope. Matt, on the other hand, was harder to reach. I called him several times, left voicemails, even texted, but he didn't respond. Finally, I decided to drop by his apartment. When he opened the door, his expression was guarded. "What do you want?" he asked, not bothering to hide his irritation. "To talk," I said. "Please, Matt. Just give me 5 minutes." He sighed and stepped aside, letting me in. The apartment was a mess, pizza boxes on the counter, an empty beer bottle on the coffee table. He sat down on the couch and gestured for me to sit across from him. "Say what you need to say," he said, crossing his arms. "I want you to know that none of this changes how I feel about you," I began. "You're my son, Matt. You always have been, and you always will be." He scoffed, leaning back. "That's easy for you to say. You're not the one who just found out your whole life was a lie." "I get that you're angry," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "And you have every right to be. But I need you to understand that I didn't know. I didn't lie to you. Your mom made a terrible mistake, but that doesn't mean you're any less a part of this family." He shook his head, staring at the floor. "I don't even know what family means anymore," he muttered. I leaned forward, my elbows on my knees. "Family means showing up, even when it's hard. It means loving each other, even when things get messy. And I'm here, Matt. I'm not going anywhere." For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then, finally, he looked up at me, his eyes filled with something between anger and pain. "I don't know if I can forgive her," he said quietly. "Not yet." "That's okay," I said. "Take the time you need. Just don't shut us out completely. We're all trying to figure this out together." He nodded reluctantly, and though it wasn't a resolution, it felt like a small step forward. By the time I left his apartment, I felt emotionally drained. But for the first time in weeks, I also felt like maybe, just maybe, there was a way to move forward. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be quick, but I was willing to fight for my family. Even if it meant picking up the pieces one by one. With Rachel and Matt slowly beginning to engage, albeit hesitantly, I knew the next step had to be counseling. If Sarah and I were going to have any chance of rebuilding trust, and if our family was going to heal, we needed help navigating the wreckage. The first session was uncomfortable, to say the least. Sarah and I sat in a small office with muted colors and shelves lined with books about relationships and self-help. Our counselor, Dr. Hayes, was a soft-spoken woman in her late 40s who immediately set the tone with calm but probing questions. "Let's start with why you're here," she said, looking between us. Sarah glanced at me, her hands nervously twisting in her lap. "I made a mistake," she said finally, her voice trembling. "A terrible, unforgivable mistake." Dr. Hayes tilted her head. "Unforgivable? Is that how you feel, Mike?" I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "I don't know," I admitted. "It feels unforgivable. 30 years of lies. It's hard to wrap my head around it." "Understandable," Dr. Hayes said, nodding. "But let's try to focus on what brought you here today. What do you hope to achieve from these sessions?" "I want to fix things," Sarah said quickly, her voice cracking. "I want to rebuild what we've lost. I know I've hurt him, and I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I have to try." I didn't respond immediately. What did I want? Did I even know? After a long pause, I said, "I guess I just want clarity. I don't know if I can forgive her. I don't know if I can trust her again. I'm here because I don't want to make a decision I'll regret later." Dr. Hayes nodded, making a note in her journal. It sounds like you're both here with different goals, but there's a shared desire to explore the possibility of moving forward. That's a good place to start. The session continued, with Dr. Hayes guiding us through the emotions we'd been avoiding. Sarah opened up about her reasons for keeping the affair a secret, though hearing her rationale did little to ease the pain. I was selfish, she admitted, tears streaming down her face. I was scared to lose you, scared to break up our family. And as the years went on, it just became easier to bury it, to pretend everything was fine. And you didn't think I deserved to know the truth? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. I thought I was protecting you, she said. But I see now that I was really protecting myself. Dr. Hayes intervened gently. Sarah, do you understand how your decision to keep this secret might have impacted Mike? Yes, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. I know I've destroyed his trust. And I know I can't expect him to forgive me. But I want him to know that I never stopped loving him. Not for a second. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Did she really love me, or did she just love the stability I provided? Dr. Hayes turned to me. Mike, how do you feel hearing that? I sighed, running a hand through my hair. It's complicated. Part of me wants to believe her. But another part of me keeps asking, if she loved me so much, how could she lie to me for so long? How could she let me build a life on something that wasn't real? That's a valid question, Dr. Hayes said. Trust is the foundation of any relationship, and when it's broken, it takes time, and effort, to rebuild. But it's not impossible. The question is, are you willing to try? I didn't answer right away. The truth was, I didn't know. I wanted to try, but I didn't know if I had the strength. By the end of the session, Dr. Hayes gave us some homework. Write down what you value most in your relationship and what you think has been lost. We'll discuss it next time. As we left the office, Sarah tried to hold my hand, but I pulled away. I wasn't ready for that yet. The car ride home was silent, but for the first time in weeks, the silence didn't feel quite as suffocating. It wasn't peace, but it was a truce. That night, as I sat at the kitchen table staring at a blank sheet of paper, I wondered if I could even answer the question Dr. Hayes had posed. What did I value most in my relationship with Sarah? And was it something we could ever get back? I didn't know. But for the first time, I was willing to consider finding out. The days following our first counseling session were quiet, almost eerily so. Sarah seemed hesitant around me, like she was walking on eggshells, and I couldn't blame her. Every interaction between us felt heavy, as though the weight of everything unsaid was pulling us further apart. I worked late most nights, not because I had to but because I didn't want to go home. Home didn't feel like home anymore, it was just a house filled with memories I couldn't trust. Pictures on the walls of birthdays and vacations now felt like a mockery, reminding me of the years I'd spent living in ignorance. The kids weren't much better. Rachel was distant, only calling when she absolutely had to. Matt hadn't been by the house since the night of the big reveal. Alex tried to keep the peace, but even he seemed worn down by the tension. One night, after another long day at work, I came home to find Sarah sitting in the living room with a photo album spread out on her lap. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes red and puffy. "What are you doing?" I asked, setting my keys on the counter. "Looking," she said softly. "At the life we built. At everything we've been through." I didn't respond, just stood there, unsure of what to say. "Do you ever wonder if we can get back to this?" she asked, holding up a picture of us at the beach, the kids laughing as we stood knee-deep in the waves. I looked at the photo, and for a moment, I wanted to believe it was possible. But the wounds were still too fresh. "I don't know," I admitted. She nodded, her expression crumbling. "I don't blame you. I wish I could take it all back. You can't, I said, my voice harsher than I intended. You can't erase what you did, Sarah. You can't undo the lies or the betrayal. I know, she said, her voice breaking. But I can try to make it right. If you'll let me. I sighed, rubbing a hand over my face. It's not that simple. I want to try, Sarah, I do. But every time I look at you, I'm reminded of everything you've hidden from me. I don't know how to move past that. Then let me help you, she said, standing and taking a tentative step toward me. Please, Mike. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I didn't move, didn't respond. The truth was, I wasn't sure if I wanted her to help. Part of me wanted to shut her out completely, to protect myself from more pain. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the good times, the laughter, the love, wanted to believe we could find a way forward. The next counseling session wasn't much easier. Dr. Hayes had us read the lists we'd written about what we valued most in our relationship and what we felt had been lost. Sarah's list was filled with hope and longing, our connection. The way we laughed together. The way Mike always made me feel safe. Mine was more guarded, more raw, trust. Honesty. The belief that our love was real. Dr. Hayes didn't judge, didn't push us to feel something we weren't ready for. Instead, she asked us to reflect on what we wanted to rebuild and what we were willing to let go of. I want to rebuild trust, I said finally. But I don't know how to do that when everything feels so broken. That's a good starting point, Dr. Hayes said. Trust isn't something you rebuild overnight. It's earned, piece by piece, over time. Sarah, are you prepared to do the work to earn Mike's trust again? Yes, Sarah said without hesitation. I'll do whatever it takes. And Mike, Dr. Hayes continued, are you willing to take small steps toward rebuilding that trust? Even if it's just one step at a time. I hesitated, then nodded. I'm willing to try. But I need space to process. I need honesty, no matter how painful it is. Sarah agreed, and we left the session feeling lighter, maybe. It wasn't a resolution, but it was a start. That night, as I lay in the guest room staring at the ceiling, I thought about the photo Sarah had been holding. The beach, the laughter, the life we'd built. I didn't know if we could ever get back to that, but for the first time, I allowed myself to hope. It wasn't much. But it was something. The fragile truce Sarah and I were building was a start, but the weight of the kids' emotions loomed over everything. Rachel, in particular, was struggling. She still wasn't coming by the house, and every phone call with her felt like walking on eggshells. One evening, she finally agreed to meet me for dinner. I chose a quiet restaurant she liked, somewhere familiar, somewhere safe. When she arrived, she barely made eye contact, and her usual spark was nowhere to be found. The first few minutes were filled with awkward small talk about work and her friends. But as soon as the waiter brought our drinks, Rachel set her glass down and leaned forward. I don't understand how you can even be in the same house as her, she said, her voice trembling. I wasn't surprised by her question, but it still stung. It's not easy, I admitted. Every day is a challenge. But I'm trying to figure out what's best for all of us. For all of us, she repeated, a bitter edge in her tone. Do you really think what's best for me or Matt is staying connected to someone who lied to us our whole lives? I took a deep breath, trying to keep my own emotions in check. Rachel, I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But cutting your mom out completely isn't going to make the pain go away. Her eyes flashed with frustration. You don't get it, Dad. It's not just about what she did to you. She let me believe a lie about myself. She let me think I was yours, that our family was real. And now, every time I think about it, I feel empty. Like I don't even know who I am anymore. Her words broke my heart. You're still you, Rachel, I said gently. Nothing about this changes who you are or how much you mean to me. You'll always be my daughter, no matter what. But I'm not really your daughter, she said, her voice cracking. Not in the way I thought I was. Blood doesn't define family, I said, reaching across the table to take her hand. Love does. And I love you, Rachel. That hasn't changed. It never will. She looked down at our hands, her expression softening just a little. I don't know if I can forgive her, she said quietly. That's okay, I said. Forgiveness isn't something you can force. It takes time. And it's not just for her, it's for you, too. To let go of the anger so it doesn't eat you up inside. She nodded, though she didn't look convinced. I don't know if I can ever trust her again. Trust is hard to rebuild, I admitted. I'm struggling with that myself. But the only way forward is one step at a time. You don't have to make any big decisions right now. Just take it day by day. The rest of the dinner was quieter, less tense. We talked about lighter topics, her job, a new book she was reading. By the end of the night, she gave me a small hug before leaving, and though it wasn't much, it felt like progress. When I got home, Sarah was waiting for me in the living room. How did it go? She asked, her voice tentative. She's still angry, I said, sitting down across from her. But she's talking. That's something. Sarah nodded, her eyes welling with tears. I hope she can forgive me someday. I hate what I've done to her. She's not ready yet, I said honestly. But maybe, with time. Sarah wiped at her eyes and nodded again. I'll do whatever it takes to prove to her, and to all of you, that I'm still worthy of being part of this family. I didn't respond, but in that moment, I realized how much pain she was carrying too. She had made terrible mistakes, but she was trying to atone for them. It didn't erase what she'd done, but it made me wonder if there was still something worth salvaging. That night, I sent Rachel a text, I'm proud of you for facing this, even though it's hard. I love you, always. Her response came a few minutes later, thanks, Dad. I love you too. It wasn't a solution, but it was a step. And right now, that was all I could hope for. While Rachel had started to tentatively re-engage, Matt's silence was deafening. Weeks had passed since our dinner, and every attempt to reach him ended in a missed call or a short, dismissive text. It hurt, but I didn't want to push him. I knew he needed space, and I didn't want to risk driving him further away. One Saturday morning, I decided to try something different. Instead of calling or texting, I showed up at his apartment unannounced. It was risky, but I couldn't just sit back and let him disappear from my life. When he opened the door and saw me standing there, his expression was a mix of surprise and annoyance. Dad, what are you doing here? I needed to see you, I said. We haven't really talked since, everything. Can I come in? He hesitated, then stepped aside to let me in. The apartment was as messy as it had been the last time I visited, but I didn't comment on it. He sat down on the couch, and I took the chair across from him. What do you want to talk about? He asked, his tone defensive. You, I said simply. How you're doing. How you're feeling. He leaned back, crossing his arms. How do you think I'm feeling? I just found out my dad isn't really my dad, my mom's been lying to me my whole life, and the guy who actually was my dad is dead. I don't even know where to start. I can't imagine how hard this has been for you, I said gently. But I want you to know that I'm still here. I'm still your dad, Matt. That hasn't changed. He scoffed. It's not that simple, Dad. Everything's different now. I feel like I don't even know who I am anymore. I know it feels that way, I said. But you're still the same person you've always been. This doesn't change that. It does, though, he said, his voice rising. I look in the mirror, and all I can think about is the fact that I'm not who I thought I was. I'm not your son, not really. And the guy who is my dad. He's not here. He's never going to be here. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. Matt, I know this is painful, I said, my voice breaking. But I don't want you to think for a second that you're not my son. I've been your dad since the day you were born, and nothing will ever change that. He shook his head, his eyes filled with tears. You say that, but it doesn't feel the same. It's like there's this huge hole in my life now, and I don't know how to fill it. I wanted to reach out, to hug him, but I could tell he wasn't ready for that. Instead, I leaned forward and said, you don't have to figure this out alone, Matt. I'm here for you, and I always will be. No matter how long it takes, we'll get through this together. He didn't respond right away, just stared at the floor, his jaw clenched. After a long silence, he finally said, I don't know if I can ever forgive Mom for this. That's okay, I said. You don't have to rush to forgive her. Take all the time you need. But don't shut us out, Matt. Don't shut me out. We're still a family, even if it feels broken right now. He nodded slowly, though he didn't look convinced. I need time, he said. I understand, I said. But promise me you'll let me be here for you. Even if you're mad, even if you don't know how you feel, don't shut me out completely. For the first time, his expression softened, just a little. I'll try, he said quietly. It wasn't the resolution I was hoping for, but it was something. As I left his apartment that day, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a long road for Matt. But I was determined to walk it with him, no matter how hard it got. That night, I told Sarah about the conversation. He's hurting, I said. He's angry, confused, and lost. But I think he's willing to let me help. Sarah wiped a tear from her cheek. I wish I could fix this for him. For all of them. You can't fix it, I said. None of us can. But we can be there for him. That's all we can do. As I lay in bed that night, I thought about Matt's words, about the hole he felt inside. It hurt to know I couldn't fill it for him, but I resolved to keep trying. Because no matter what, he was my son. And I wasn't going to let him face this alone. As time passed, the tension within the family slowly began to thaw, but it was far from healed. Rachel had started calling more often, sometimes even dropping by the house, though her interactions with Sarah were still strained. Matt, on the other hand, remained distant, keeping me at arm's length. I knew pushing him too hard would backfire, so I tried to give him space while reminding him I was always there. It was Sarah who made the next move, surprisingly enough. One evening, after we had just finished a quiet dinner, she looked at me and said, I want to try something. With the kids. I raised an eyebrow, unsure of where this was going. What do you mean? I want to meet with them. Individually, she said. No pressure, no expectations. Just, an open conversation. I need to own what I've done, and I need to hear them out. Even if they yell at me, even if they hate me. I need to give them the space to feel whatever they need to feel. I studied her face, looking for any signs of hesitation or ulterior motives, but all I saw was a quiet determination. Do you think they'll even agree to meet with you? I don't know, she admitted. But I have to try. We decided to start with Rachel. Sarah sent her a long text, apologizing again for the hurt she'd caused and asking if they could meet for coffee. To my surprise, Rachel agreed. The day of their meeting, Sarah was a nervous wreck. She paced the living room, muttering under her breath and wringing her hands. What if she doesn't even let me explain? What if she just walks out? Then you accept it, I said gently. This is about her, not you. Let her guide the conversation. Just be honest. When Sarah left, I sat in the quiet house, anxiously waiting to hear how it went. She returned 2 hours later, her eyes red but her expression calmer than I'd expected. How'd it go? I asked. She's still angry, Sarah said, sitting down on the couch. But she listened. She told me how betrayed she felt, how much it hurt to find out the truth after all these years. And I didn't try to defend myself. I just let her talk. Did she say anything about forgiving you? Sarah shook her head. No, and I didn't ask her to. That's not what today was about. I told her I was sorry, that I'd failed her, and that I would spend the rest of my life trying to make it right if she let me. By the end, she said she didn't know if she could forgive me, but she didn't storm out. She hugged me before she left. That's a good start, I said. Encouraged by the small step forward with Rachel, Sarah decided to try reaching out to Matt next. I wasn't sure he'd even respond to her message, let alone agree to meet, but to my surprise, he did. They met at a park near his apartment, a neutral and public space where Matt could leave easily if things got too heated. Sarah was even more nervous this time. He's always been more like you, she said as she got ready to leave. When he's hurt, he shuts down. I don't know if he'll even talk to me. When she came back, she looked emotionally drained but relieved. He talked, she said, her voice trembling. Not much, but enough. He told me how angry he was, how disappointed. He said he feels like he can't trust anyone anymore. And I told him he was right to feel that way. That I'd broken his trust and I didn't expect him to forgive me. What did he say to that? He said he doesn't know if he can ever forgive me, she said, her voice breaking. But he also said he doesn't hate me. That he doesn't want to, even if he feels like he should. And before he left, he said he'd think about trying counseling, with me. That last part caught me off guard. Counseling? With you? She nodded, tears streaming down her face. It's more than I could have hoped for. I know it's not forgiveness, but it's a start. Hearing that gave me a sense of hope I hadn't felt in weeks. Maybe we weren't as broken as I thought. Maybe there was a way forward, even if it wasn't easy. That night, I texted Matt to tell him how proud I was of him for taking that step. His reply was simple but meaningful, "Thanks, Dad. I'm trying." It wasn't much, but it was enough. One small step forward for him, for Sarah, for all of us. And right now, that was all we could ask for. As Sarah and I slowly chipped away at the wall that had built up between us and the kids, it became clear that Alex was playing a vital role in holding things together. Unlike Rachel and Matt, who wore their pain on their sleeves, Alex took on the role of the mediator, trying to keep everyone connected while quietly processing his own emotions. One evening, Alex invited me to grab a drink at a local bar. It wasn't unusual for us to spend time together, but I could tell there was something specific he wanted to discuss. We sat at a corner table, nursing beers as we watched the crowd around us. "How are you holding up, Dad?" he asked after a few minutes of small talk. I shrugged, swirling the beer in my glass. Honestly, some days are better than others. It's been hard. He nodded, taking a sip of his drink. Yeah. I figured. You've been doing a lot to keep us all grounded through this, though. I just wanted to say I see that, and I appreciate it. His words caught me off guard. Thanks, Alex. That means a lot. But I feel like I've failed you guys. I couldn't stop this from happening. I couldn't protect you. You didn't fail us, he said firmly. You didn't even know. None of this is your fault. I nodded, though guilt still gnawed at me. How are you doing with all of this? I asked. He sighed, leaning back in his chair. I'm okay, I guess. It's weird. I feel like I should be angrier at Mom, but mostly I just feel sad. I can't stop thinking about how long she's carried this secret. I don't know how she lived with herself all those years. She thought she was protecting us, I said. But in the end, she was protecting herself. And now we're all paying the price for that. Alex nodded slowly. I don't know if Rachel or Matt will ever fully forgive her. And honestly, I don't know if I can either. But I do think she's trying to make it right. I can see how much she regrets it. She does, I said. She's been doing everything she can to fix this. But it's going to take time. For all of us. Alex hesitated, then leaned forward, lowering his voice. Can I say something? Something I've been thinking about. Of course, I said. I think Rachel and Matt need to see that you're okay with her, he said carefully. They're looking to you for how to feel about all of this. If they see you taking steps to forgive her, to rebuild, it might help them do the same. I frowned, considering his words. I don't know if I'm ready for that, I admitted. I'm still figuring out how I feel, Alex. I can't rush forgiveness. I'm not saying you have to forgive her tomorrow, he said. But maybe start by showing them that you're trying. That there's still a foundation for this family, even if it's cracked. His insight hit me hard. I hadn't realized how much my actions, or inaction, might be influencing Rachel and Matt's responses. You're a good man, Alex, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Your mom and I are lucky to have you. He gave me a small, sad smile. I just want us to get through this, Dad. All of us. When I got home that night, I thought about Alex's words. He was right, of course. If I wanted my family to heal, I couldn't just sit on the sidelines, waiting for things to magically fix themselves. I had to lead by example, even if it meant pushing myself out of my comfort zone. The next morning, I sat down with Sarah at the kitchen table. I think we should have a family meeting, I said. She looked up from her coffee, her eyes wide with surprise. A family meeting? Yeah, I said. All of us, me, you, the kids. It's time to lay everything out, to figure out where we all stand. If we're going to move forward, we need to do it together. She nodded, a flicker of hope in her eyes. I'll do whatever it takes, Mike. Thank you for giving this a chance. As I texted Rachel, Matt, and Alex to set up the meeting, I felt a strange mix of dread and anticipation. I didn't know how it would go, but I knew it was a step we needed to take. Because Alex was right, if I wanted my family to heal, I had to show them that healing was possible. Even if it hurt. Even if it took everything I had. The day of the family meeting felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, not knowing whether I'd fall or fly. I sat in the living room with Sarah, waiting for the kids to arrive. She was silent, wringing her hands, and I could tell she was just as nervous as I was. Rachel was the first to arrive, her expression guarded as she walked in. She glanced at Sarah but didn't say anything, choosing instead to sit on the far end of the couch. Matt arrived next, offering me a stiff nod before sitting in the armchair closest to the door, like he wanted an escape route. Alex came in last, giving me a reassuring look as he took the seat next to Rachel. The air was thick with tension, and for a moment, no one said anything. Finally, I cleared my throat and spoke. Thank you all for coming, I began, my voice steady despite the knot in my stomach. I know things have been difficult lately. And I know you're all still processing everything that's happened. But I thought it was important for us to come together and talk about where we go from here. Rachel crossed her arms, her lips pressed into a thin line. Where do we go? That's a good question, she said, her tone sharp. I don't have all the answers, I admitted. But I know that I don't want this to tear us apart. We've been through too much as a family to let this break us. Matt leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. It already has, he said bluntly. Everything's different now. Nothing feels the same. You're right, I said. Things are different. And they always will be. But different doesn't mean we can't find a way to move forward. It doesn't mean we stop being a family. Sarah, who had been sitting quietly, finally spoke. Her voice was trembling but earnest. I know I've hurt all of you. And I know I've lost your trust. I don't expect forgiveness, not now, maybe not ever. But I need you to know that I love you. All of you. And I will do whatever it takes to prove that, even if it takes the rest of my life. Rachel let out a bitter laugh. Love? You call this love? Lying to us for decades? Letting us believe something that wasn't true? I was wrong, Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. I was selfish and scared, and I made terrible choices. But my love for you, for all of you, has always been real. That's the only thing I'm certain of. Rachel looked like she wanted to argue but stopped herself. Instead, she turned to me. What about you, Dad? How are you just okay with this? How can you even sit here next to her? I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. I'm not okay, I said honestly. I'm angry, I'm hurt, and I'm still figuring out what forgiveness looks like. But I know that shutting each other out isn't the answer. I love all of you, and I love your mom. And as much as this has broken me, I'm not ready to give up on us. Matt rubbed his hands together, his face conflicted. I don't know if I can forgive you, Mom, he said, his voice quiet. I don't even know if I want to. That's okay, Sarah said, nodding through her tears. Take all the time you need. I'll wait. I'll keep trying, no matter how long it takes. Alex, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. Look, none of this is easy, he said, glancing at Rachel and Matt. But Dad's right. If we shut each other out, we lose everything. And I'm not willing to lose my family. Not like this. Rachel sighed, her posture softening just a little. I'm not saying I'm ready to forgive, she said cautiously. But I'll try. For Dad. For Alex. Matt didn't say anything at first, but eventually, he nodded. I guess. I'll try too. But it's going to take a long time. That's all we're asking, I said. The rest of the evening was spent talking, really talking. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, moments where emotions ran high. But for the first time since the truth came out, it felt like we were moving towards something better. When everyone left that night, Sarah and I sat together on the couch in silence, exhausted but hopeful. That was a start, she said quietly. Yeah, I agreed. A start. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. The scars of betrayal don't heal overnight, and trust isn't rebuilt in a single evening. But for the first time in months, I felt like we had a chance. A chance to rebuild, to grow, and to redefine what family meant to us. And sometimes, a chance is all you need.